here. Tonight, we're going to be learning Maseches Eruvin Daf Chaf Aleph, and we're starting on the bottom of Chaf Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. We spent a significant amount of time discussing Pasei Biros over the last many days. Of course, this is the name of the parak of Osin Pasin. And what we're going to be doing tonight is really learning some fundamental aspects of Pasei Biros, ideas that I've mentioned in passing, but here are the Mari Makomos to indicate the reality of these dinim as it relates to Pasei Biros. So we'll start on the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom of Chaf Amud Beis. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Ada, lo hutru Pasei Biros elo lo ole regalim bilvad. When do we allow this chiddush of a kula, that these 4 L-shaped brackets, each part of the bracket a tefach long, when do we say that that functions? So answers the Gemara with clarity. Rav Yitzchak bar Ada says that it's only true by Ole Regalim. It's not true throughout the year. It's only true by Ole Regalim. To ask the Gemara V'Atanya, hold on one second, that's not true. Lohutru Pasei Biros elo legabe behema bilvad. It's only true by a behema. So what does that have to do with Ole Regalim? Yes, of course, you're going to bring a behema when you're Ole Regel. But lav dafka, that's the only time you move a behema on Shabbos. Maybe we should say that every time there's a bore, every time there's a pit, we should say Pasei Biros are allowed by all behemas. Why only by Ole Regel? So answers the Gemara, my behema, behemas Ole Regalim. That's the din. That when it comes to Ole Regalim, what was the contradiction? We thought one said it was only mutter Ole Regel, and one said that it was mutter for all behemas. Answers the Gemara, they're one and the same. It's behemas Ole Regalim. However, that's only by animals. That's where we have a heter, by animals who are Ole Regel. What about you who are bringing your animal with you? So let's see. It says the Gemara, Aval Adam metapes ve'ole metapes ve'yore, turning to the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. You are allowed to climb in and climb out in order to get water, but you can't transfer rishuyos. Now the bore is its own rishus, and we surrounded it by Pasei Biros, but the kula of Pasei Biros doesn't apply to people. It only applies to animals. It says the Gemara, Eini. That doesn't seem to be the case. Why not? Because the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Lo hutru Pasei Biros elo lebe'er mayim chayim bilvad. What did we say about Pasei Biros? The only time that it's mutter is when the water is mayim chayim. But asks the Gemara a very practical question. I don't understand. Ve'ila behema, if what you're saying is that the only time that we are allowed to use the Pasei Biros is for animals, but for people, you're not allowed to use the Pasei Biros, then why do we need mayim chayim? Who cares what the water is made out of? Ve'ila behema, mali chayim, mali mechunasin. I don't care if the water is from a fresh spring. If I'm a behema, and I don't care if the water has been sitting there for a week, I'm going to drink it no less. There's no Brita filters in nature. Animals drink water wherever they can find it. So what's the havamina that the Gemara needs mayim chayim? What that should indicate, seemingly, that a person should be able to drink from that too. We should be able to use the Pasei Biros as well. Maybe we should not only be metapes v'ola, metapes v'yored. Maybe we shouldn't have to crawl down into the pit to get water from within the pasin, because the pasin don't work for us; they only work for behemoths. So says the Gemara. No, says the Gemara, but midi dechazi la'adam. We need it to be fit for a person. Why do we need it to be fit for a person? So this is a diyun in the Rishonim. Take a look at Rashi, who gets into a lamdasha idea, simple, but gets into a lamdasha idea that goes down to the very underbelly of how Pasei Biros works. Let's see what he says. Says the Gemara, says Rashi at the where is this? Rashi, second line of the page. Dibur hamas chal midi dechazi la'adam. Says the Gemara, says Rashi, Kevan demayim mashvelu mechitza b'inyan mayim chashuvin. Since the water is what makes the pasin into pasin, so therefore the water has to be real. The water has to be chashuv. It's not because it's not because people can drink out of it. We shouldn't erroneously assume that people can drink out of the pasin because the water is mayim chayim. The reason why we need mayim chayim isn't because people are allowed to use the pasin. The reason we're doing that is because the water that's inside the bore, that's within the pasin, that water is what makes the mechitza a mechitza. And because that's what makes the mechitza, so therefore the water has to be mayim chayim. So therefore, we're back to our original assumption that yes, the Pasei Biros are allowed for behemas ole regalim, but for people, I can climb down into the pit and I can drink a cup of water while I'm standing in the pit. but I'm not allowed to use the pasen if I'm a human being. That's not allowed. Gufa, 6 lines down. Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara. Lo huchu pase biros elo lebehema bilvad, aval adam etapes v'olam etapes v'yored. We said this already, that pase biros are allowed for behemas ola regel. However, as it relates to a human being, you're allowed to crawl down and take whatever you need, no problem at all. However, you're not allowed to use the pasen if you're a human being. It says the Gemara, there's even a heter for a human being, for an adam, to use the pasebi rose. What is that? That's if the pit is so wide that you're not able to climb with like a foot on each side. Let's say the span 3-4 feet, whatever the number actually is. Depends how tall you are, I guess. Depends on your leg span. So if you're able to crawl down and kind of prop yourself up from one side of the board to the other, then you're not allowed to use pasen. But it says the Gemara, if it's rechavin, then afilu the adam nami, then even there we would say that pasebi rose is mutter for a human being to use. Afal pi, that wasn't the nature of why they were created. Then it says the Gemara as follows. This was a Gemara that we saw before. We're not allowed to fill up a pitcher of water and give it directly to an animal, but rather, what do we do? We're mamale who v'shofech lifnei behema. We pour it into a trough, v'shosime eleha, and the animal can drink it on its own. So then the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, maskif lo Rav Onan im kain, if that's true, that we're not allowed to feed them directly from a pitcher, but rather we have to pour it first into a trough, and then the animal can consume the food that we're putting in there. In kain, mahu ilu pasebi rose. So asks the Gemara, what's the point of the pasim? And then with just sheer shock, the Gemara is like, what are you talking about? What do you mean mahu ilu? Lemalos mehen. Okay, we have a unique din about how the animal has to drink it. You have to put it in the trough first. But the whole chapa pasebi rose is that you can take the liquid out of the bore and bring it onto ground. So what do you mean, maho ilu pasebi rose? What a strange question. Of course they're helpful. They allow us to take the liquid out of the bore and into the area that's outside the bore, but within the pasebi rose. So says the Gemara, no, you misunderstood my question. Elamaho il Rosh of Aruba Shalpara. Why do I have this whole din of Rosh of Aruba Shalpara that it needs to be? Remember, we said a couple of blot ago. Was it yesterday? 2 days ago? I think yesterday we started this way. Yeah, somewhere on the bottom of your Testament Aleph, we said Kama Rosh of Aruba Shalpara Shtei Amos. And remember, we got into these whole chakiras about where's the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Well, if the bore is 8, then there's up to 8, then there's no machlokas. If it's above 12, then there's no machlokas. In between machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. Fine. So here the Gemara is bothered by the following. If you're anyways pouring the food into the trough, so what's the whole deal with Rosh of Aruba? Well, why do I need the shear anymore? They're drinking out of the trough. The trough is planted in the ground. It's not going anywhere. Who needs Rosh of Aruba anymore? So answers the Gemara, Amar Abaye, about a quarter of the way down, Chaf Aleph Amar Aleph, Amar Abaye, Hacha b'maya skinan. What case must we be dealing with? We're dealing with a case that we saw yesterday. This unique, complex case. Be'ebus ha'omed b'reshus harabim. You have a trough that's resting in reshus harabim. Gavo asar v'rochav arba. It's its own reshus. It's 10 by 4. It's 10 tall and 4 by 4 wide. The rosho nichnas lebein apasim v'chulei. Just that case that we saw yesterday on Shabbos when we learned together at Makor. We saw this Gemara, and that's the Yokim to here where Rosh of Aruba comes in, and that's where we need Rosh of Aruba. But you're right. You're right, in Stama case where there's no trough, you're right. We don't really need Rosh of Aruba when they're drinking out of a trough. I know it's only in this unique case where we're afraid that maybe somehow you might transfer from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid or vice versa. 1/3 of the way down. Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rav, Ein Borgenin beBavel, v'lo pasebi rose b'chutz la'aretz. Borgenin are like small shacks. And the background of what this Gemara is referring to here is the halachos of the 2,000 amma tchum, the tchum Shabbos as we refer to it, that after you leave the city limits, you're not allowed to walk more than 2,000 amos from the city limits. How does this shape exactly work? Can you draw a square? You're marviach the zavios. We're going to learn about all of that a little bit later. But in short, once you leave the city limits, you have to measure 2,000 amos, 3,500 feet, whatever. It's about 60, 70% of a mile, give or take a little bit. And the halacha is that if you have a structure where someone might live, then the 2,000 amma starts over. So let's say 1,000 amos out, there are 3 houses. There's 1 house. So then you get another 2,000 amos from that house. So that's what we're talking about. That's borgenen. It's a little shack where somebody might live. So however, the halacha is, ein borgenen bebavel. Sorry. The Gemara says, ein borgenen bebavel, that we don't use the leniency of shacks in Bavel, below pasebi ros bechutz laaretz. And even outside of Bavel, we don't rely on pasebi ros. That only applies seemingly in Bavel. Borgen in Bavel, why don't we allow these shacks to extend our Tchum Shabbos in Bavel? Because there's a lot of flooding there. It's a very water-rich area, and when it rains a lot, the water overflows and it can knock down the shacks. So therefore, your shacks are not reliable. Therefore, your Tchum Shabbos can't be expanded. Pasebi Ros b'chutz la'aretz lo. Why don't we allow the Mechudash world of Pasebi Ros, these 4 L-shaped brackets? Why do we not allow that in Chutz La'aretz? Because the Lo Shchichim Mesivta, there aren't a lot of yeshivas. What does that even mean? Take a look at Rashi, 3-4 inches above where we are. Tibur Hamaschil de Lo Shchiche Mesivta. Says Rashi, there's not a lot of yeshivas, where people are walking from city to city. And the only time we allow pasebi ros is by ola regalim. And then look at what Rashi does here. Rashi expands the Gemara. This is a big discussion. Rashi expands the Gemara. What does Rashi add in this Rashi? And he says, wow. Rashi extends our Gemara. Rashi says that when our Gemara says that pasebi ros are only allowed when it is for Ola Regalim, it's lav dafka. It's any mitzvah. But when you're in a place like Chutz La'aretz, where there aren't a lot of mesiftas, there aren't a lot of yeshivas back in the Gemara, so then says the Gemara, Delo Shchichim Mesifta, so then no, pasebi ros don't work there because you're not going to have the chevra, you're not going to have the people going from base medrash to base medrash to be in need of the pasebi ros. No stama yid is allowed to use pasebi ros. It has to be l'tzorach mitzvah, says Rashi. So this, of course, is going to be a discussion in the Rishonim. It's about how expansive is the world of pasebi ros. Do we only say ola regalim in a very limited, narrow myopia, or do we say that it even applies more broadly to any mitzvahs in the Torah? Of course, Rashi will be on the lenient side. And then it concludes the Gemara with this first version of our Borgenen discussion, Aval Ipcha Avdinan. However, in reverse, it does work. What does reverse mean? So Rab just taught us the din that Borgenen in Bavel, there's no Borgenen in Bavel, which the opposite would be that there are Borgenen in Chutz La'aretz. And we said there's no pasebi ros in Chutz La'aretz, which means there are Borgenen in Bavel. So that's what the Gemara means when it says about Ipcha Avdinan. Just about halfway down, starting with the Ika de Amre. Ika de Amre, Amar Rav Yomi bar Abba, Amar Rab. No, I'm more strict than that previous Shita. What does he say? This is another student in the name of Rab. You got to follow this because the first one said in the name of Rab and the second one said in the name of Rab. So it's Trei Talmidim Aliba de Rab. Aliba de Rab. It's a little difficult to know what he held. The boys in Shir didn't understand the same way. I don't mean boys in a minimizing way. The Talmidim, they understood differently. Let's see how this Talmud understood. Let's see what Rav Yirmiyah understood. Ein Borgenen, he says, Ein Borgenen upasebi ros lo bebavel velo bechutz la'aretz. They're not allowed anywhere. They're not allowed anywhere except for Eretz Yisrael. But if they're in Bavel, afal that it's a Makom Torah, they're not allowed, and they're not allowed in Chutz La'aretz. So let's see why. Says the Gemara. Borgenen bebavelo d'shchiche bidke. As mentioned, that the little shacks that help us to extend our Tchum Shabbos, that's not allowed because there's floodgates. B'chutz la'aretz nami lo d'shchiche ganve. In Chutz La'aretz, we don't allow the borgenen because, according to some, they were portable, and you could mamish pick them up and move them. It would be like a portable sukkah ki'ilu, like one of those, one-person Rosh Barubo sukkahs. You can pick it up and move it. So that's not sufficient to extend your Tchum Shabbos. That's just not enough. So therefore, we didn't allow the borgenen to work in any location. And then says the Gemara, pasebi ros bebavelo d'shchiche maya. We didn't allow pasebi ros in Bavel because they never needed it. Bavel was a water-rich place. They had a lot of rivers there, so they didn't need the leniency, the chiddush of pasebi ros in Bavel because they had plenty of water sources. So in a place where there was a lot of water, we didn't allow for pasebi ros. B'chutz la'aretz, halfway down, chaf aleph amud aleph. B'chutz la'aretz nami lo, de lo shchiche mesifta. And for the reason, like we said before, that possibly roasts were not allowed in chutz la'aretz because there were no yeshivas. So there's just a machlokes as to how to understand the shita of Rav. Amar le Rav Chizda, lemari berei de Rav Huna, berei de Rav Yirmiyah, bar Abba. What did they say there? Amrei, they said, Asisu mi Barnash lebe kinishta de Daniel. People would travel from the city of Barnash or Barnish. There's different ways to read the word, and they would travel to the shul of Daniel, a shul where Daniel, the prophet, used to daven historically. And that distance was to have a tlasa parse b'shabsa. It was 3 parsa. Now 3 parsa is longer than 2,000 amos, way longer. And therefore, the concern was that they violated Tchum Shabbos. So says the Gemara, Amai Samchisu, excuse me. What did you rely upon to extend your Tchum Shabbos? Because we just spoke about not being allowed to use Borganin. So how did you extend your Tchum Shabbos enough to get from Barnish to the Shul of Daniel? How did you Taka get there? What did you do? Tachlis, a Borganin? Did you rely on the small shacks that were there? That can't be. Ha'amar avuha de'avuch mishmei derab ein Borganin bebavel. You're not allowed to rely on those. So how did you make it? How did you make the walk? Nafak va'achve lehanhu masvasa demivlaan b'shivin ama v'shirayim. Says the Gemara that there were some actually small ruins that actually were livable conditions, I guess, in some way, shape, or form. And those functioned as Borganin. They functioned as the extensions. Like sometimes we have a Wi-Fi extender. The root is in the basement. You have a Wi-Fi extender to give you another 20 feet. The Wi-Fi extender here, it says Rashi was Masvasa. Rashi Dibra Maskal Masvasa, 2 inches above where we are, about halfway down to the Rashis. Ayaros Charevos, they're cities that were destroyed. Vinisharusha Mechitzos Minabatin. There were still some walls left from those homes. And that's why we were allowed to get from Barnash or Barnish to the shul where Daniel davened. Continues the Gemara at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down. Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chizda. We're going to learn a lot of agadatas between here and the end of the day today. So we're done with. I think we're pretty much entirely done. Yeah, we're done for today with the world of Eruvin. We will see one more reference, but it's done in a hashkafa frame. It's not done in a halacha frame. So let's learn some agadata. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Chizda, Darish Mari Bar Mar, Mai Dichsiv L'chol Tichle Ra'isi Ketz Rechava Mitzvosecha Me'od. Your mitzvos are very vast. What does that mean that the mitzvos are very vast? So says the Gemara, Davar Ze Amru David V'lo Pirshu. David made a reference to this in Tehillim. Nobody knew what he was talking about. Amru Iyov V'lo Pirshu. Iyov as well, if Iyov existed, discussion. V'lo Pirshu, he also didn't explain it. Amru Yechezka V'lo Pirshu. He also, the 3 of them had references to what it meant that the mitzvos were rechava, the mitzvos were very expansive, but nobody really gave a nitty-gritty, detailed answer. Ad Sheba Zechariah ben Ado Pirshu, until Zechariah from Chagai Zechariah Malachi, the last of the Anshe Knesset Sagdol, the last of the Nevi'im. By the time that there was a Chorban, famous idea that we'll learn, I think it's in Sota. I think Mark learned Sota. You can remind me. There's a Gemara somewhere that says that once the Beis HaMikdash was Nechrav, we lost Nevuah. And then we're all done. Without a Beis HaMikdash, you can't have Nevuah. Without that, you can't have a Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah, which is why in our brains, like the Avodah Zarahs of inanimate objects are so difficult to comprehend. Like who would ever want to bow down to a stone that you carved? You know that it's Sheker V'Chazav. Like why? Very difficult to understand. So at the same time that Nevuah left, we also lost our Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. But at the same time, now that we're in the month of Elul, this is Kedai to talk about. At the same time that that's true, we also no longer have the same cheshek to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as they did. And that's why sometimes, maybe regularly, I feel this, I'm sure others do as well. Sometimes it's hard to connect. Part of that is because there's no Beis HaMikdash, there's no Nevuah. And because there's no capacity for Nevuah, there's also less of a capacity for closeness. On that scale, of course, there's room to be close. We see people are close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We should be among them. But sometimes it's difficult because of this. Anyway, Zechariah, who was of the last of the Nevi'im, he did give pshat in this. Now let's go through all of these people. Amru David below Pirshu. What did he say? The pasuk we just saw. We don't know what he meant. Amru Iyo v'lo pirshu. What did Iyo say that he did not explain? Just as wide as the waters. Still, we don't know what he meant. Yifros, Amru Yechezkel. Yechezkel also said it. V'lo pirshu. We don't know what he meant either. Tichsiv vayifroso sali lefanai v'hi ksuva panim v'achor u'ksuva leha kinim v'hege v'hi. What does all of that mean? What are these things that it was written on it back and front, and it was written on it kinim v'hege v'hi? What does all of that mean? What's kinim v'hege v'hi? So says the Gemara, kinim zupor anusan shal tzadikim b'olam hazeh. When the pasuk references kinim, it's a reference to difficult things that happen to tzaddikim in this world, which really is a Maseches, even though it's hard it's a bitter pill to swallow sometimes. But when someone gets more trials and tribulations here, it means that they have less Gehenim over there. So that's really what is being referenced here. What's v'hege? Says the Gemara, Zo matan schar shal tzadikim lasid lavo. This is a reference to the schar of a tzaddik when he gets to the next world. That's mamish. That's the beauty. That's the bright light. The Yisaneg al Hashem, to be so close to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's a bright light. V'cheinu omer alehi gayon b'chinor. Pasuk we're familiar with. This is referencing alehi gayon from the word hege b'chinor. It's going to be played like a flute. This beautiful sound. Vahi. What did that mean in the pasuk of? What did that mean in the pasuk of Yechezkel? Says the Gemara, Zoe por anusan shel rishayim lasid lavo. This is talking about the punishments of bad people in the next world. V'cheinu omer hava al hava tavo. Okay, hava al hava tavo ad tavo. Hava al hava. Hold on 1 second. Let me just get that correctly. I misunderstood that. Hava hova al hova tavo. Period. Yeah, I had the period in the right place here. Okay, and that was all the three people. That was David, and that was Eov, and that was Yechezkel, who spoke about the breadth and expansiveness of mitzvos, but did not do so in a way which was detailed. So it says the Gemara 8-9 lines from the bottom. He's had a nevuah. What do you see? I see a book. I see like a Megillah that's closed, folded on itself. Orka esrim ba'ama, urchava eser ba'ama. It was 20 amos by 10 amos. If you have a 20 by 10 document and you open it, what's the new surface area? So says the Gemara, so then havila esrim be'esrim. If it's 20 by 10 closed and you open the book, it's 20 by 20 open. Good. That's how expansive a mitzvah is, but it gets even more. And it's written, the pasuk writes that it's written on both sides. So it's 20 by 20. If you open it yet again, it says the Gemara, if you were to peel them apart, if you open the book yet again, it folds out yet again. We're looking at a mitzvah, any one mitzvah, that is 40 amos by 20 amos. That's 800 square amos of surface area. That's a lot. So then says the Gemara Uksiv, and we also know separately, that when we refer to Shamayim, it is Bezeres Tikain. What does Rashi say? Rashi, 10 lines from the bottom or so, Dibur HaMaschil, V'Shemen, V'Shamayim Bezeres Tikain. Rashi says, Midas HaOlam. When we refer to the measurement of the world, again, this is all above our pay grade in regards to Havana. But what does the Gemara say here? It's Chatzi Amma al Chatzi Amma. When we reference the physical size of the world, it's no different than a half an amma to a half an amma. Now, when you compare that half an amma square to that very, very large 800 square amos, my gosh, it's such a big difference. And the Gemara details it 3 lines from the bottom. Nimtza, kol ha'olam kulo. Echad, it is a ratio of 1. Mishloshes alafim umasayim b'Torah. It's 1 to 3,200. That is the ratio. Of course, we have to look at the Maharals and look at the Marshas and look at all the Sfarim HaKadoshim to see what all of the mathematical Torah is about. We can ask Rabbi Shechter to give a Dvar Torah on this, but the basic gist is that the physical world has no comparison by its volume, if there were such a comparison to be made, between itself and a mitzvah in the Torah. That's what we finally learned from Zechariah. We got a big picture here of what a mitzvah is actually worth. And it's worth 3,200 times that which we have here in this world. It says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph. Omer Rav Chizda, Darish Mari Bar Mar. What does the pasuk mean? That there's two containers, two buckets, two collections of te'enim of figs. Says the Gemara, Hadud ha'echad te'enim tovos me'od ki te'eni ha'bechoros. One of them is beautiful te'enim, turning to the top of Chaf Aleph on the base, and then continues the Gemara, V'hadud ha'echad te'enim roos me'od. Asher lo sochlena me'roa. Some of them are so bad they're inedible. We see that sometimes you buy some produce, it comes home, by the time it gets into the fridge, it's a disaster already. It's inedible. So that's these two different kinds of te'enim. So then says the Gemara as follows: Te'enim atovos elu tzadikim gemurim. What is referenced here by the pasuk? These two different types of dudaim, these two different types of te'enim. Some are good, some are not so good. So the ones that are the ones that are good is a reference to tzadikim gemurim. Te'enim haros elu rishayim gemurim, and the ones that are bad figs, those are the bad people. The rishayim gemurim. Such a beautiful Gemara. Listen to this. V'shema tomar ovad sivra muvatel sikuya. Maybe the Rasha gomers out. Nothing left for him. He's just totally lost. Says the Gemara, Talmud lomar hadudaim nasenu reach. No, they still give off a good smell. Elu ve'elu asidin sheyitnu reach. Everyone, tzaddik, v'rasha, whoever we are, we all have the capacity to be nosein reach, to give a good smell, as it were, to make sure that we're giving reach nichoach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And none of us are Rishayim Gemurim, but we all have our own struggles. But that doesn't mean that we can't be the nosein reach. It doesn't mean that when our korban kaviyachol can't be reach nichoach l'Hashem. It should be, and it could be. If Rishayim Gemurim can do it, then those of us who are aspirational, those of us who learn, those of us who try, those of us who grow, then we should be in good standing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please God. Torah Shrava. A little bit of a different pshat in Nasnu Reach. Says the Gemara, Elu b'chure Yisrael shelo tamu tamchet. No, this isn't referring to Rishayim and Tzadikim. It's referring to people who've never done a sin before, and that's not us. That's usually little children who are raised in a wonderful environment, who know the gravity of a chet and who know the gravity and beauty of a mitzvah. What does that part of the pasuk mean? It says the Gemara, Elu b'nos Yisrael. That they share about their openings, a reference to the osamakom, a reference to a woman's menstrual cycles, to their husbands. That they make sure to literally tie up, but to close up, to make sure that they're unavailable to other people so that they can be available to their husbands. Take a look at Rashi on the top of the page. Rashi, Dibur HaMaschil, top line, She'ogdos. Halfway through the first line, Rashi says, Koshros Pischan, they cover themselves in a meaningful way. Letzorach Balein, She'ena Nivalos Lachira, Ogdos Lashon Aguda. Lishna Charino Shemagidos Pischen, Kshero Adam, Omeres Labala, V'yifrosh Emana. So then we have a din, of course. We know that if a couple is in the midst of intimacy, and a woman is Poreses Nida, so the halacha is that a woman has to say, I feel like I've gotten my period. I feel like I've reached my menstrual cycle. And halacha l'maisa, this in theory can happen. It's not so common, but in theory it can happen. And in such a case, halacha l'maisa is that tashmish amita, the intercourse under those circumstances, when a woman says, I know now that I'm poreses nida, that I've reached my menstrual cycle, the hana of tashmish amita is an isur d'oraisa. So the poskim, they're right that you have to be yotze be'ever meis. So a person would stay in place until the kishui, until the erection would subside, and then they can be yotze migufa, and that would be this din here. That's what the pasuk means. V'apsachenu kol negadim, that they would share about what's going on with their menstrual cycle to ensure that they don't violate any isurim, and to make sure that a couple is not violating any isurim in nida. Chadashim gam yishanin doditza fanti lach. What does that pasuk mean? We're about 10 lines down on Kaf Aleph on the base. Says the Gemara. The Jewish people say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm sure you all know that Shir HaShirim is a love story, a story of comparison of male-female, who is the male, who is the female, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Jews is that the Torah. It's all these discussions in the Rishonim on Shir HaShirim, Ayin Sham. Go look at a lot of the Sifrei Hakdama there, look at Rashi there on Shir HaShirim, a lot of commentary there to discuss. But the Gemara says here, that Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people, say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, Harbe Gzeros, Harbe gzeros gazarti al atmi, yoser mimasha gazarta alai, v'kiyamtim. We added so many Dine Derabanan to your Torah, and we keep them. It's such a beautiful idea. Most of our lives are consumed by Dine Derabanan. Most of our lives, the way that we live our lives there isn't anything that doesn't have a Din Derabanan. Everything is touched by something. And that's what the Gemara is saying. Such a beautiful relationship where we take it to the next level. It's not just taking out the garbage. It's taking out the garbage, but doing it with a smile. And that's a din. That's a din ki'ilu. You have to do it right. It's not just what has to be done, but it's how it's done. It's the tone, it's the feel, and it's the way that it exudes off of us when we keep the Torah. There was someone teaching Agadatas in front of Rav Chizda, and he said, "Mishmiel chadashim gam yishanim mahu." Did you get pshat in the pasuk about chadashim gam yishanim? So we said that the yishanim was the Torah, and the chadashim was all the extra gzeros that we added. But let's hear a new pshat. Amar lei, he said to him, "Elu mitzvos kalos, ve'elu mitzvos chamuros." We have different kinds of mitzvos. We have mitzvos that are lightweight, and we have mitzvos that are heavyweight. Says the Gemara, "No, we don't." What are you talking about? Says the Gemara, Amar lei v'chitorah pa'amim nitna. What are you talking about? No, we have mitzvos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said 613 mitzvos. That's what we have. Some of them may have elements of them from a halachic perspective that are kal. We say this about Eruv Mamish. We say it's a mitzvah gerua because there's nothing actually happening when you walk inside a house where you're still walking. So we have ideas like that, but it doesn't apply be'etzem to the mitzvah. So then it says the Gemara, you're right. El halalu midivrei Torah, v'halalu midivrei sofrim. You're right. Absolutely. It is the case. It is like we said before, that Chadashim Gam Yishanim. The Yishanim is a reference to Divrei Torah, and the Chadashim is a reference to Divrei Sofrim. We're about 1/3 of the way down, Darash Rabba. Darash Rabba, my dechsiv. What does the pasuk mean when it says, Vayomer Mahema b'nei hizaher aso svarim harbe? You should make sure, my son, be careful to write a lot of books. Seemingly, that's what it means. Asos, to make a lot of them. B'ni, hizaher b'divrei sofrim yoser midivrei Torah. A person should make sure that they're more careful with dinei sofrim, with dinei derabanan, than they are with dinei deoraisa. Why? Shedivrei Torah yesh bahen aseh v'lo saseh. When it comes to divrei Torah, you have two options: aseh or lo saseh. Remache baravu shesagidov. That's all you got. The divrei sofrim. But when it comes to dinei derabanan, there's only one unfortunate outlet if you fail. What's the unfortunate outlet? Says the Gemara, Kol over al divrei sofrim chayv misa. Rashi quotes the pasuk, Uporez geder yishchenu nachash. That when we violate dinei derabanan, we incur the wrath of the chachamim in that we are doing something very wrong. We have to be keeping dinei derabanan. A din derabanan might sound so casual in certain areas, all right, you're not allowed to look at that, you're not allowed to smell this, but if you take a piece of cheese and you put it on a piece of salami, that's also an isur derabanan. That's very severe. It's like a lo yu'uman that a person would ever, that's a din derabanan. The only time by basar b'chalav that it's a din deoraisa is when they're muvushal together, when they're cooked together. You buy a burger, and let's assume for the moment that that's considered bishul. That's a shaila too. We'll get to that in Pesachim. But if you have boiled meat and you pour in some cheddar cheese, that's mamish bishul doraisa. But it's also nisur derabanan to do. A lot of things are nisur derabanan that are very, very, very severe. So that we have to make sure that we keep them. Otherwise, the Gemara is very sharp here. That kol ha'over al divrei sofrim chayv misa. Continues the Gemara, Shema Tomar. Maybe you could argue by dinei derabanan. Listen, how important could they be? Im yesh b'en mamish mipnei malo nichtabu. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to keep us, He should have written it. Who are you? Well, you're coming along and telling me all these dinei derabanan. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to not do something, He'll tell me. What do I need you for? So it says the Gemara, Amar Kra, that's our pasuk. Aso svarim harbe ein kates. We constantly write, we constantly learn, constantly apply the klalim of Torah to new technologies, to new age, to new ideas, things that maybe we never heard of before, like the medrash that says that Moshe Rabbeinu was put forward in time into Rabbi Akiva's. We didn't know what he was talking about. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know what Rabbi Akiva was talking about. Come on, Moshe ad Moshe lo kam ke Moshe. Seriously, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. How could it be? So the answer is that we have new Torah. It's not new in that we uproot the past, God forbid. That's mamish heresy. But it's new in that we have new applications of din, and that's what we're talking about here. The pasuk continues, V'lahag harbe yegias basar. What does that pasuk mean? Amar Papa Bered Rab Acha Bar Ada Mishmei de Rab Acha Bar Ula. Melamed, what do we learn from that? Shekol hamalig al divrei chachamim. If a person were to be malig, remember the pasuk says v'lahag lamed hey gimel. Here we need to play on words where we say malig, where someone mocks and someone makes fun of. In that case, so then says the Gemara, if somebody does that, if you make fun of chachamim, yikes, punishment is terrible. Here's what the Gemara says: nidon b'tzoa rosachas. A person will get the punishment of boiling excrement. That does not sound pleasant. Maskif Rava miksiv laag. Look at the pasuk. The pasuk doesn't say lamed ayin gimel. The pasuk says lahag with a hey, lamed hey gimel, lahag siv. Therefore, we flip this pasuk into a positive thing. Forget about the tzoa rosachas. That's very unpleasant. But really, the pasuk wasn't talking about laag with an ayin, but lahag with a hey. Therefore, what? Anyone who invests time in learning Torah, toim tam basar. It's as if they just tasted the basar. They tasted the meat, obviously a mashal, that the Torah is like a korban. The Torah is beautiful, tasty. Tana Rabbanan, a story that will bring us just about to the end of the page. Maskif la Rabba, Tana Rabbanan, Maisa Rabbi Akiva, Shaya Chavush bebeis asur. At one point in Rabbi Akiva's life, he was in jail. Why Rabbi Yoshua HaGarsi Mishar? So Garsi is a person, he's from this place of Garas. Machlokas with the word Garas means Rashi quotes two opinions here. Via Rabbi Yoshua HaGarsi Mishar, he was serving him. Yom vayom, and every day, Hayu Machnisin lo mayim b'mida. You would bring him a measured amount of water every day. Yom echad mitzau shomer beis asurin. One day, the servant bumped into one of the security guards in the jail. Omar lo, the security guard said, Hayom memecha merubin. You brought him too much water today. What's the deal? We have rules here. So Shema lachtor beis asurin atatzarich. Maybe you're collecting all this water to soften the ground. Shawshank Redemption. You'll start scooping out a piece of sand here. You're gonna mamish be choser. You're gonna dig out. You're not allowed to have that much water. So shafach chetzion, he poured out half of it. B'nasan lo chetzion, and gave the next half back to Rabbi Yoshua to give to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, when he finally got to Rabbi Akiva with the water, Amar lo, Rabbi Akiva said, Yoshua, don't you know I'm an old man and I rely on you? My life is in your hands. I need more water than this. Sachlo kol osa hameora. So what he did is he told him over the whole story. Amar lo teimli mayim she'etol yadai. Fine, it is what it is. I'm Rabbi Akiva. I'm going to be fine. Give me the water. I have to wash netilas yadayim. Amar lo, Rabbi Yoshua said to him, lishtos ein magin, lito yadecha magin. With whatever water you have, what are you doing? You're gonna wash netilas yadayim. You're gonna die. You're not allowed to do that. You got to prioritize your life. Chayacha kodmin. You got to be able to drink. Why are you washing netilas yadayim? One doesn't weigh up against the other, or does it? Omar lo, Rabbi Akiva said back to Yeshua, ma e'eseh, what would you like me to do? Shechayavin alein misa. If I don't wash, I'm chayav misa. Why? Because the Chachamim prescribed netilas yadayim. And if I don't wash netilas yadayim, I'm chayav misa. And look at this line, which is subject to a serious machlokas in the Meforshim about how he could have ever thought this way. We don't believe in suicide by halachos terabanan. What does he say? Mutav amus misa atmi. I'd rather die. V'lo e'evor al divrei chaverai. How does that work out? Was he willing to sacrifice his life to wash netilas yadayim? So the Meforshim are bothered by this. Answers lakan ulakan. Amru, they said about this story, lo ta'am klum, achehevi lo mayim v'notal yadav. He wouldn't eat anything, nothing, until he had enough water to wash netilas yadayim. Beautiful, powerful story, a little bit difficult to understand. כששמעו חכמים b'davar, when the Chachamim heard about this story about Rabbi Akiva, they said, wow, I think he set a new bar for us. Here's what they said. Amru, ma beziknu so kach. If this is an old man who's willing to take it to the nth degree, what about those of us who are young? We're not in our 100s. We're younger people. We should be able to take the bull by the horns. I'm tired. You're tired. You're exhausted. Rabbi Akiva's in jail and not drinking water because of netilas yadayim. But I'd rather slack off and come on, says the Gemara. That's we gotta raise the bar. Not just that, he wasn't sitting in a cushy house. Uma beveis ha'asurin kach shelo beveis ha'asurin alachas kama v'kama. Come on, you gotta be able to up your game a little bit. So that's what the Gemara says. The Chachamim are highlighting that the story of Rabbi Akiva ups the ante of where we should be. There are other Gemaras and shots like this. Let's continue because the hour is late. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. We are 2/3 of the way down. Kaf Aleph and Beis b'Shashatike and Shlomo Eruvin and Netilas Yadayim. Famously, we know that Shlomo was misakein certain aspects of Eruv. Rashi here makes some distinctions. So does Tosfos, I believe. Yeah, Tosfos does as well. So when Shlomo was misakein Eruvin and Netilas Yadayim, Yatzis Abbas Kol ve'Amra. There was a voice, a heavenly voice that came out to show the agreement that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had. What did it say? It says the Gemara, Binim chacham limcha yismach libi gamani. I'm going to be so happy in my heart. Omer chacham b'ni v'samach libi v'ashiva charfi davar. We're going to stop here. I did prepare a little bit more, but we'll stop here now. That's okay. And tomorrow night, Emir Tashem will learn Daf Chaf Beis, bringing us all the way up to all the way down, I should say, to the Mishnah on the bottom of Chaf Beis and Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.